everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my worst books of the year for 2021. Really, this is more like most disappointing books. Very few of these are books that I'm like, oh, this is like the worst thing I've read. For the most part, these are just things that I was very disappointed by because either they just were not what I was expecting, they weren't really my thing, whatever my reason being. I'm probably not going to get too in detail about why they were disappointing because for the most part I don't remember a lot of them. Like, I remember the high level stuff but not a lot of detail about it. Because like when I dislike a book, I tend to try and just like forget about it to make brain space for things that I do like. But yeah, so I have actually 10 books to talk about, but only 4 of them are books that I completed. So this year I was trying to like really DNF books if I was not enjoying them. And so that means that it was a little hard to put this list together because there weren't books that I really disliked that strongly. This year, overall, I had a little bit of a hard time putting together both my best and worst lists because it was a pretty like mediocre, just kind of in the middle reading year for me. So there weren't a lot of books that I had strong feelings about either way. You know, there were a couple, but for the most part, there were not a lot of like strong loves or strong hates this year. And because I DNF'd so frequently, you know, there were not a lot of books that I completed that I disliked very strongly because I usually DNF'd them before I got to that point. Let's get started. What were my most disappointing DNFs? These ones I have not ranked. We're just gonna go through them in any old order. So first one, oh, these are dusty. So first one on the top of my pile is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is a series that I know is a booktube darling. It's very beloved in the, you know, adult fantasy circles. People rave about the incredible friendship in this book, but I just was like, where? I took my bookmark out, but I got a decent way. I think I got like halfway into the book or something. And I just was like, I know next to nothing about these characters and their friendship. I don't care about these characters at all. I don't care about their friendship or relationship or literally anything that's going on. All right, next up we have She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This was very disappointing because I really wanted to love it. I really thought I was going to, and I really liked the first like quarter of the book because we're following our main character as they are really first struggling to survive and then hiding in a monastery for years, and I really loved that part. But then it really took a turn and became more of a military fantasy, but in a way, like, I'm not a huge fan of military fantasy to begin with, but also the way in which it was done. The characters we were following are really motivated by just like destiny, glory, ambition for the sake of ambition, and like, you know, I must fulfill this destiny, and that is just not interesting to me. I just was like very disconnected from this. I felt very distant from the characters, so. All right, next up we have, oh, this one was a big disappointment as well. I mean, all of these are, but still. Which is Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian. This is inspired, so this is supposed to be the story of Camelot. It is like an Arthurian retelling told from the perspective of the Lady of Shalott, which in concept, something I would be very excited about. In execution, not a fan. Mostly because there didn't, like, one, I just didn't really like the writing style. I didn't like the character dynamics, but also there just like wasn't really a lot of internal consistency to the world building. It would tell you, oh, the world works in this way, society works in this way. The main characters would act counter to that, and then there would be no repercussions for them going counter to the culture of the time. And that just like was so frustrating to me. Anyway, so that is really what bothered me most about this, is lack of internal consistency. It really just didn't feel like it hung together. And I don't know, it just, this one just frustrated me a lot, and I was really hoping that I would love it. All right, the next one we have was one that like I had never heard of until I just kind of randomly picked it up, but I was really hoping to like find a hidden gem, and then that did not happen, which was Mother Ocean, Daughter Sea. This is one of those books that was kind of a cover buy. I found it on Thrift Books, and looking at it, I was just like, oh, this looks like a book that I would love. Also, it's about like this woman who's a healer, but she has to be in hiding because all of her people have been killed. But then, you know, she has to like go on some kind of quest. I don't remember, but love a healer character in a book. The main character is just like not that interesting or engaging. At the beginning of the book, she spends a lot of time alone, and she is not a character who is interesting enough to spend a lot of time alone. The magic in this was very weird. There are these, like, anytime she uses her healing magic, she then, when she goes home and goes to sleep, she has this like dream of a monster attacking her, and she has, but it's like, it's a dream, but it's kind of real, because if she doesn't defeat the monster in her dream, she like might actually die. But like, one, didn't really make sense. Two, the scenes of her fighting this monster in her dream were just so cringy and poorly written. I just did not like it. But the thing that really just was like, there's no coming back from this for me, was the romance in this, which I didn't even really get to the part where there's a romance, but there is, I think he's like a duke or something that she's supposed to have a romance with. The thing is, he's already married, and his wife seems like a very nice but sad person, because he's not nice to her. So it was like an arranged political marriage, and there seemed to be some cultural differences in sort of like what are their expectations of each other in a marriage. And instead of like communicating, he just really dismisses and dislikes his wife, even though she's doing, as far as she knows, according to her cultural norms, she's doing her best. I just felt so bad for her, because like, she seems like a nice person who is trying her best, and she can tell that her husband hates her for no apparent reason, but won't communicate with her about why, and so she just continues to blame herself, and it just made me hate him so much. And then when he meets the main character, essentially his first thought about her is like, oh, she's not like other girls because she actually is useful. I don't know what this author could possibly do to make me get on board with this guy as a romance, like as a love interest. So this was definitely a DNF. This was just like not gonna happen. Okay, then speaking of books that were with characters that spend a lot of time alone and are not interesting enough to do that, we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was the first book that I read last year, and then DNF'd. So, you know, if my superstition about the first book of the year setting the tone for the year is true, I think that makes sense. This was my first DNF. I DNF'd a ton of books last year, so I think it did set the tone for the year. But this book, I have, as I've read more and more from V.E. Schwab, I have liked her books less and less. I loved the first book I read from her, which was Vicious, but after that, my enjoyment for books has just like slowly gone downhill. This was kind of my like last hurrah, my last attempt at liking her books, because everybody was saying like, oh, this is so different from anything else that she's written. And I was reading this, I was like, this is exactly the same as everything else that she's written, except for slower and more boring. And also the main character, Addie LaRue, spends a ridiculous amount of time alone and is not an interesting enough character to like hold that. She's not interesting enough to hold the story alone. I don't remember what else I disliked about this because it's been a year since I DNF'd it, but overall, I just remember being like, this is so boring. I don't like Addie LaRue. She pretty much is the exact same as like every other female protagonist that V.E. Schwab writes, because she pretty much only writes one female protagonist character. And I don't like that character. I don't like whatever that archetype is. So yeah, I think this was a good choice, but very unfortunate for the first book of the year last year. All right, the last book that I have here was my most recent DNF, the last thing that I DNF'd in 2021, which is The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. This, I got about, how far did I get into this? I got like a little over a third of the way into this book. And I have not done my winter DNFs video yet, so I don't have like a full explanation for it out there yet. Oh yeah, also, I will be linking any videos where I talked about these books in the description. So if you want to hear more detail about why I DNF'd any of these books, those will be there. This is the only one that doesn't have one of those yet because I haven't done my winter DNFs yet. But The Wolf and the Woodsman. Why did I DNF this? I mean, part of it is because like I did feel like it started out with pretty strong like dark forest atmosphere, and I really liked that about it. But really the thing that kind of turned me off from this was the romance in it. I knew going into it that it's an enemies to lovers romance, which is not my favorite romance trope. I don't hate enemies to lovers, but it's not something that I would like go, oh, enemies to lovers, therefore I must read. It's just kind of like meh. But this is a very poorly written enemies to lovers. In this, like our main character, her people are like killed and abused by the like the main love interest, like his people, because his people are kind of in charge and they are horrible to her people. And I don't know, is it every year or something, they come and like take one of the girls from her village to the capital, and that girl is never seen again. They don't know what happens to her. They assume she's probably killed or tortured or something happens to her. So like there is a clear reason for the enmity between these two characters, but like that doesn't last. At first she's just like, I hate him with this like deep burning hatred. I hate him more than anything in the world. And then like there's a 180 like almost immediately where she's like, I'm like imagining the warmth of his body against me and be like, well, he's actually not that bad. Maybe he's nicer than I thought. And I'm like, that was such a quick turnaround, and it's so ridiculous because then I'm like, the whole point of enemies to lovers is for there to be this like drawn out tension and this like slow build and realization between the characters, not her being like, I hate you, wait a minute, you're kind of hot. Like that's not how this works. Anyways, I was very frustrated by the enemies to lovers and how poorly done it was. So I just was like, I don't care about anything that's happening in this, and I don't care about these characters. Like, I'm done with this. So now we're gonna talk about books that I actually did finish. The first one is Forest of Souls by Lori M. Lee. I was really looking forward to this one when I first got it because it's about like a malevolent forest, and that is a thing that I love. We always love forest vibes. I was very excited for it. However, since it came out, I heard some negative reviews for it. So going into it, I was aware that I may not love it, but I still had hope for it because I love a good, you know, dark evil forest. But this ended up being a real disappointment for me because, not because it was like horrible, but just because like I had so little feeling about it. It just was very bland in every aspect of the book. I just like felt so neutral about everything. It was more just kind of exhausting than anything. So this is definitely disappointing. Okay, next up we have, these are like loosely ranked. For the most part also, like I'm not really ranking these other than like my #1 most disappointing book. But next up we have The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This book I had very high hopes for because I have just heard people sing its praises, but I think that it had a lot of interesting ideas in it, but ultimately I just didn't like the execution. I think there were parts of this that needed to be fleshed out, especially in the world building, because this has two, like there are a few different cultures, but it's majorly about like the culture in the East and the culture in the West. They're very underdeveloped in my opinion. I think that we needed a lot more information about them because there wasn't a lot that distinguished the two other than one says dragon's good, one says dragon's bad. That was pretty much all that I knew about these. I also found some of the points of view in this both very annoying and incredibly pointless. I really only cared about two of the points of view, which are the two main characters, Addie and the other one that I don't remember, Tane. They were the only characters' points of view that I was interested in. And also I think the only ones that were really necessary. I didn't like the way the book ended. There were some real ridiculous plot conveniences towards the end. Those are the things that I remember about this. Now, I didn't, oh right, also there's a villain in this that I hated because she just does these ridiculous villain monologues. All right. I didn't actually hate this book as a whole, but there were a lot of things that I think it could have done better and that it really needed work on, that really needed to be fleshed out. And for how, like, I felt about this book, 800 pages is a lot. You know, if this had been under 600 pages or something, I probably would not have been as frustrated or disappointed with it. But to feel relatively neutral to negative about a book for 800 pages, it just like wears you down more and made me more frustrated by it. Okay, so apparently I did have a lot to say about that one. That apparently is one of the books that is like burned into my brain, I guess. All right, next up we have one that was just very disappointing to me because I have liked this author before, which is Blancaeroja by Anna Marie McLemore. Anna Marie McLemore is an author that I've read a couple of their books and really enjoyed them. They write YA magical realism, and I've just really liked a lot of their books. They have very like beautiful writing that feels very magical and is very descriptive. But this one just really didn't work for me. Like, it still had the beautiful writing. There were some things about this that I did like there's a character named Paige, I think is their name, who I really liked. But I didn't really care for the two main characters because this is about two sisters who are kind of cursed that one of them is going to be turned into a swan, but they don't know which one. I feel like the element of the swans themselves just were not really well integrated into the story because the swans are supposed to kind of, oh gosh, there go the dogs, like one day turn one of these sisters into a swan and take her away, right? And so they're supposed to be kind of menacing and they show up sometimes, and every once in a while like one of the sisters would get really angry and she like goes out and is like confronting the swans and like yelling at them. However, we never got a sense for what the swans were actually like, or like what they were thinking or anything. most of the time when they would do that, I just feel like you're out here yelling at a bunch of birds. Like, it didn't feel like they were confronting anything. The swans didn't feel menacing at any point. It felt like they were just yelling at a bunch of birds. Yeah, so it wasn't that this book was like horrible so much as disappointing, because I was really hoping to love it, because I have really liked a lot of Anne-Marie McLemore's other books. All right, then my final most disappointing book that I did complete, which actually is more like, I'm kind of like, this is actually just not a very good book. So this is the worst book that I read this year, is Daughters of the Storm by Kim Wilkins. This book, I had such high hopes for. It sounds like something that I would really love, because it is about these 5 daughters of a king, each of which has a very distinct role in the kingdom. They all have very different personalities, very different strengths, and these very different like roles and circumstances to their lives. But the king becomes sick, and they believe it is poison, I think, and so they all have to come together and work together to save their father. So that just sounds like something that I would love, because I really like stories about familial relationships, but especially ones about sisters, and that they're all like very different from one another, but they have to figure out how to come together to save their father. But then this just, I don't know, it really didn't work out. I read, like at the beginning, I was reading it and I was like, this is gonna be so good, I'm gonna love this so much, and then it just like really tanked. All of the characters, like they started out very interesting to me, because we were kind of looking at these different like archetypes of these sisters almost, but then it never went any deeper. It just stayed very surface level, and the characterization was very bland and shallow. The sister relationships were barely explored, which was the thing that I was like most interested in. I think the plot was kind of boring and had like weird pacing to it. Also, I think I really didn't like the way that this book handled disability. There are 2 characters who are disabled, and just the way the book handled both of those characters and their disabilities, I think, was very poorly done. I don't know, there were so many things I didn't like about this book, but those are all of the things that I can remember at this point. But it just is like, it started out really well for me, and then it just really went downhill, and I remember being like, there was not an element of this book that I think was executed well. So I was incredibly disappointed by this. Okay, so those are the books that I actually completed that were most disappointing to me. But I would love to know, what was one of your most disappointing reads of the year, whether you finished it or you were just disappointed that you had to DNF it? I would love to know. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.